Tired of the noise and spin? Join the MiddleGround Mic Patreon for 7 days for free. And then it's just $1 a month afterwards. Real talk, real people right now. Sign up today, middlegroundmic.com. Click on the button. Hello, everybody. I hope everybody's doing well today. On this episode of the MiddleGround Mic, we sit down with Ronald Bee, a seasoned U.S. foreign policy expert who's worked in Washington, D.C., Europe, and the Middle East. He's got decades of experience from teaching at the U.S. Naval Academy to commenting on national TV. Ron brings a crazy, unmatched insight into a lot of the current issues. Today, we're going to kind of break down some of the conflicts, how's our role evolving, how do the tensions impact everyday Americans, and how the policy just goes around in general. How are you doing today, Ron?
Doing great, Joe. Thanks for having me on.
No, thank you for being on. Like I had told you earlier, I was very, very excited when I see your profile. It just kind of fits a lot of what we do here.
Yeah, well, we're on the same page. I think that middle ground is always the best way to go when you have a chance to do so.
Yeah, I always stress in a lot of my episodes that America was founded on the art of compromise.
That's correct. The whole U.S. Congress is supposed to do the same.
Yes, we've kind of gotten away from that.
You noticed.
Yeah, it's not supposed to be so concentrated in power, and that's what's hurting us and making us not able to make decisions.
Well, I think you need to be a nationalist and not a tribalist, and less tribal politics and more about what's good for the country.
Oh, yeah, we need to rewind it about 30, 40 years.
Yes, no, every 10 minutes these days.
Yeah.
So I appreciate your podcast.
Yeah, so obviously, one that I think definitely focuses around a big part of where, you focus is how sustainable right now as we talk about Ukraine, right? Already last week, Russia seemed to kind of be a little open and then went right back to doing what they were doing. How long can we continue to support this without taking drastic measures?
Well, the president has, in the last couple of days, said that, he's going to give Putin another 2 weeks to come to the peace table and stop bombing Ukraine. But he's done this before, and Putin has said, thank you very much, I'll just keep bombing Ukraine. The Ukrainian dilemma is a very tough one, simply because 20% of Ukraine is occupied by Russia. Ukraine doesn't want to give that up. There's, the blood of Ukrainians, lies on that ground. So the Russians want all of Donbass, and they don't occupy all of Donbass, so they're trying to get something through diplomacy that they can't get on the battlefield. But this is a war of attrition that has cost 1.2 million lives thus far on both sides, and they're losing 1,000 people a day on both sides. Some of them are North Koreans and Chinese and prison mates on the Russian side, but the Ukrainians are losing a generation of their young people that are standing up valiantly to protect their homeland. So I think Trump would like to see that end. However, it's a lot more difficult to do if you've got skin in the game, in this case, blood in the game.
Yeah, something that I've brought up a couple times, maybe Crimea. I know Crimea has been a huge hot plate for that area over there.
Yeah.
I've kind of wondered, is Crimea a starting point where they can officially go, okay, hey, this is a done deal, we're no longer going to argue over it, is like a starting point?
Well, yeah, but the principle for the Ukrainians is it was theirs to begin with, so why should we give it back? Russians took it illegally in 2014, and we don't talk about it that much, but the fact is that they've had a fleet there for, over 100 years, and it's a Russian-speaking area, so they just claimed it and annexed it without really too much pushback from the international community. There were some sanctions, but you notice that sanctions don't seem to work with Russia. Sanctions would have worked if Hitler put it on Russia during World War II. They lost 26 million people because it was in their vital interest to keep fighting. And I think Putin sees Ukraine as a vital interest for Russia. And so I don't see him, okay, you're gonna prick us with some pain. We're used to it. We're Russians.
Yeah, I've joked a lot, maybe not joked, but I've commented a lot that even though Russia is not supposed to be the Soviet Union anymore, with, Putin being former KGB,
yeah,
you might as well just call it Soviet Union light.
Well, he was KGB in Dresden right when the Berlin Wall fell. I worked in the West Berlin mayor's office the year before the Berlin Wall fell.
Oh, wow.
And that was pretty interesting, to say the least, to go over, and you could see that things were moving in a direction where they were fed up with what was going on there. And it was really a people's movement that overthrew the government and brought down the wall. But Putin, it was a important moment for him because there were protests outside his home in Dresden, and he picked up the phone, called Moscow and said, "Send some troops. I want to put this protest down." And they clicked on the other end. Sorry, can't help you. And so he never forgot that. And I think that also left a lasting impression that he did not like what Gorbachev did to disassemble the Soviet Union into 15 different countries, with Russia being the largest. Russia is 140 million people, but they had 280 beforehand, and so to lose that empire for Putin was something he didn't like to see. And then on top of that, Ukraine is a very special place for Russians. Of course, there's the Kievan Rus, that was a state that lasted for 600 years. And Rus is where the name Russia comes from. The Russian Orthodox Church comes from Kiev. So Russians consider Ukraine Russian. Ukrainians don't, because of a lot of the bad treatment that they've had from Russians over the centuries, including Stalin starving them back into the Stone Age, where they killed 10 to 15 million people, organized farms into a communist collective. So Ukrainians don't appreciate Russians telling them what to do. Russians are used to telling them what to do, and this is where we are.
Yeah, it's definitely disappointing to see that Russia has went in that direction.
Yeah, I was hopeful when Yeltsin was there. I was in Moscow for 2 summers in 92 and 93 with the Freedom Support Act. And even though there was 5,000% inflation, which was nuts, it was, people, bringing in boatloads of currency just to pay for a beer if you want. But it was clear that they wanted something different. But unfortunately, Yeltsin was not the guy to do it.
Yeah, he had a lot of good principles behind him, I think, and he was very well intentioned, and he wanted to see the best for everybody involved.
Yeah, he had a drinking problem too, and so he didn't live very long.
Yeah.
And as a result, by the time 2000 came around, that when Putin took over, that's 25 years ago now. He's been in power 25 years. He's set it up so he could be there till 2036. He's age 72 now. So, he set it up so that he could be like the old Soviet system where you're in charge for life, like the Brezhnev and those guys who were there until they dropped from drinking and eating too much fat, whatever. But the fact of the matter is he's going to be there for quite some time. And so that's the problem that Ukrainians have to deal with.
Yeah, and kind of like relating to that, I say a lot of what has gone on in Russia, the Russia, Ukraine, and kind of even rewinding back to 2014,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of these approaches from Russia and China, I think, is what's fueled not just domestic issues, but is what's fueled the rise of our current president. Because a lot of Americans feel that our opinion isn't respected,
Correct.
and I think that is a very underplayed thing in the media per se. And I'm not saying like a conspiracy. I just don't think it's focused on enough.
Well, I think there's some truth to that. If even if you're a democracy over in Western Europe, you look over here, then once you have one guy who seems to be pro-European, and the next guy says spend more money, it changes every 4 years. And that's also what Putin sees. He's been there for 25 years. He's looking at the long game, and he sees Western politicians as fleeting, only here for a short period of time. So he has to deal with them. But whatever. I've got my long-term interests, and they have their midterm elections. I don't need to worry about that.
Yeah. And it's definitely it's disappointing to see that our country can't be unified. I was really hoping that at this point in the game, during Trump's first term, him and the Democrats seemed to be on the same page about China. Like
Yes.
they were in lockstep, and now it kind of seems to have devolved further that even though in reality their policies towards overall in general are pretty similar towards these items, they're just so divided that they're going, hey, nope, never mind, we can't agree on it publicly because it's bad for business.
Well, the bad for business thing is always an issue, isn't it? And especially if you place tariffs on goods, then goods usually go up and the consumers have to pay the price. That's the traditional way of looking at tariffs, that they're a bad thing to grow the economy, that you need trade to grow the economy. However, President Trump has decided to use tariffs as an instrument of national policy, of national security policy. And so he's tried that, and so far with mixed results. And there's still no result on China and Russia because he's dangling this out here for hopes of a better deal. But also, pretty soon, he's going to have to slam the door on Russia because Russia is playing games with Ukraine.
Yeah, when it comes to the tariffs, I don't know when the whole thing was going down, Kevin O'Leary, he had advocated, he said, to get China to the table, stop playing games. He said, slap a 400% tariff on them starting next week. And he goes, and you'll have Xi Jinping here in Washington in a week. Because while that would hurt us, it would hurt them significantly.
Well, yeah, it would hurt both sides. But let's remember that what President Trump is trying to do is bring manufacturing back to
Yes.
the United States, and you in Detroit would know about that, and
Yeah.
especially car manufacturing, which has been one of his big pushes, and that the tariffs on cars have been pretty standard on everybody, 25% coming into this country, which is going to help Detroit.
Oh, yeah.
Not to mention a lot of other places where they're making cars now in the South and elsewhere. But the fact is that, China and the United States are the two biggest economies in the world, and it matters what we trade with one another. They also happen to have a lot of these rare earth minerals that are important to defense and aerospace. And unless we can get those from other places, one of those places is Ukraine, that, you're stopping the flow of key minerals from China at a point where you may need it to improve your defense. So there are many things in play here.
Yeah, it kind of, before we dive a little bit more into some of the other foreign policy issues,
Sure.
based on your experience, I don't want to say lack of action, such a stagnant reaction from our government, no matter who's been in power overall on a lot of these items. Do you think that's kind of contributed to where we're at?
Well, that's part of it, but policy is hard. It's not
Oh,
just
yeah.
what you think, it's what they think and what moves they make. And so then they're looking at what's going to make life difficult for you. So they do that, and then you have to decide whether or not you bite the bullet and go anyway. And the other thing I'd like to say is that I find that, everybody's got an opinion, but nobody has a lot of knowledge and does their homework to know how we got here in the first place. One of the things that I learned when I went to school at Oxford was something called a policy memo, that you have to look at all points of view before you decide on the one that becomes your policy preference. And if you don't understand the background and context of how we got here, then it's going to be very difficult to see how we can resolve things. And we tend to look at shorter term goals, like a football game ends in 4 quarters. Well,
Oh, yeah.
other countries, because of our political situation that goes up and down, play the long game, like China and Russia, as I've mentioned before.
Yeah, no, I mean, that is definitely a pretty accurate stance. I definitely would say I lean a little bit more towards the Ronald Reagan approach to foreign policy, I guess is where my heart goes when I think of it.
Well, I worked in his Pentagon, and I appreciated his approach.
Yeah, it was very America first, but it was also balanced. I don't touch a ton on immigration, but I really liked his approach to immigration as well, where he said, hey, we got these people here, they want to be here, they do work, let's get them on the payrolls.
Yeah,
And I thought
well, he
that
did
was a
that.
very common sense approach.
Well, he was governor of California, where a lot of the economy time was based in agriculture, and without the help of immigrants picking fruit and vegetables, that sector would not function.
No, unfortunately, it would not. It's a very sticky issue, unfortunately.
Yeah, it is. It is a very sticky issue. The president has taken a hard line on it. Some people like it, some people don't. I think, from my perspective of teaching political science over 20 to 30 years, I see the pendulum swing. It swings too far in one direction and too far in the other direction. And hopefully the laws through Congress pan out somewhere in the middle, the middle ground, if you will.
Yeah, and that's something that I kind of tell a lot of, or not that I'd say, but I have picked up on the Supreme Court with a lot of these decisions relating to these things. The
Right.
Supreme Court has essentially said, we don't want to decide policy anymore. That's up to your elected leaders to do. Put pressure on them to get something done.
Yes, well, that's what they're there for, to be able to do that. And I think they've done a good job thus far. And especially in all the warfare that's been going on, that the courts have been very fair, I think, in treating all sides on this. And that's what they're set up to do. Thank goodness we have it.
Oh, yes. I agree 1,000%. So let's dive a little bit into the Middle East flashpoints. I mean,
Boy,
the, the, the ironic part is I don't think a lot of people in America realize the role that Russia has with Iran.
yeah,
They're tied at the hip in a lot of ways.
well, Iran helped them build their nuclear reactors. The Russians helped Iran build their nuclear reactors in Bushehr. The Russians have a nuclear agreement with them as a result, and have provided technology that has become useful to their energy as well as nuclear weapons program. And let's get to the point here. Why does Iran need nuclear energy? It doesn't. It has enough gasoline and oil and gas in the ground to last over 800 years in terms of domestic use. So the only reason they want to develop nuclear power is for strategic purposes. And that's been clear to me since I worked in the Middle East for 6 years, from 2000 to 2006. We looked at this very carefully. What are the incentives for the Iranians to build nuclear power plants? Was clearly a strategic choice to be able to have at their disposal a nuclear weapon. This has all come to the forefront in the current conflict between Israel and Iran, and the United States played a role in damaging 3 nuclear sites, which is the first time that we have engaged in, shall we call it, preemptive non-proliferation. The Israelis have been doing it for a while. I was actually at the IAEA in Austria when they first did it on June 6, 1981, against the Iraqis. Remember that way back there? The Iraq
Oh,
War
yeah.
started with it. Well, that was against a reactor there that was about to go online, and they knocked that out. And then in 2007, September, they went in Syria and knocked out a reactor there. And when they went to survey the wreckage, they also noticed there were North Korean scientists in the rubble. So interesting
Wow.
facts to learn about that. And of course, we know that the North Koreans and the Iranians cooperate on missiles. And with the Russians in there too, you've got an interesting cohort of unfriendlies that are developing weapon systems that not only are dangerous to Israel, but also to the Western world.
Yeah. And that's very key. When I think of Iran and I think of the Israel being added into it, I was not that I'm ever necessarily opposed to keeping somebody out of a nuclear situation that could threaten everybody, right? That's not good for anybody.
Right.
But I felt that it was a little bit more of it was a goading on Benjamin Netanyahu's part than more than anything, more than it was the purpose of what he was going after. It was a goading to try to go, hey, look, these guys got this going on. Don't look over here as much. That's kind of, to me personally, that's how it felt, because I believe that what Israel did after the attack was completely justified,
Mm-hmm.
but I feel like now it's kind of gone too
So
far.
you're thinking, if I get it correctly, that he used Iran to deflect away from Gaza.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, well, Gaza's a whole nother situation. I've spent time there. I spent time in Ramallah. I've spent time in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, and held quiet meetings between 22 militaries for 6 years during a very difficult time, 2000 to 2006, 9/11, invasion of Iraq, and the election of Hamas into Gaza. Gaza is a mess, total mess, and it was allowed to become that way when Hamas took over the government in January of 2000, and then pushed out the other Palestinians from the West Bank. The Fatah was forcibly removed. They murdered people to get them out of Gaza, and like Mr. Putin, elections stopped happening, or they have elections and they're only one party is on the ballot ever since. So Hamas has been in charge ever since. Where they come from? They came originally from the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. The Muslim Brotherhood is who assassinated Anwar Sadat for making a peace treaty with Israel in 1979. In their charter, it says that was the worst thing that could have ever happened to the Arab nations, and that one of the reasons they exist is to wipe Israel off the map. How do you negotiate with somebody that has that as their goal? Very difficult. And since 2005, Israel's been pounded with missiles, many, if not all of which provided by Iran, and they're shot at civilian centers. They're not precise. And so every time a missile went off from Gaza into Israel, it was technically a war crime by the Geneva Conventions because they're shooting at civilian centers.
Right.
October 7th was war crime bonanza. You're taking hostages, you're shooting up civilians, and you can't blame Israel for wanting to defend itself. But at the same time, you have to look at who's been funding this since Hamas came into power, and the same state that's been funding Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis in Sudan. I mean, in Yemen, and that's Iran. Israel is right to point the finger at Iran because if you don't stop, if you don't cut the head off of that snake, the rest of the tentacles are going to still be choking Israel. And as long as Iran is using the territories around Israel as a trampoline to destroy Israel, there'll never be peace in the Middle East. And that's why Iran is key to fixing this problem.
Yeah, no, I 1,000% agree on that. If I'm correct, before the attack on Iran recently, I believe Trump at one point had a lot of the Arab states willing to come to the table with Israel to try to kind of figure out how to make all this work.
I know that they have been talking for a long time and sharing intelligence because they see Iran as the bigger threat than the Palestinians not having a state. All right. And so that was used as leverage to create the Abraham Accords, where the Arabs were far more interested in the threat of Iran. And so that's the stages for even more intelligence sharing between Israel and Arab states that saw Iran as the problem. In fact, the October 7th attack, many believe, was signaled by Iran to take place because Israel and Saudi Arabia were very close to a deal that looked like the Abraham Accords. And to stop that in its tracks, Iran signaled to their proxies in Gaza that October 7th needs to happen.
Now, see, that's something that I definitely did not realize. To be honest with you, I can't think of very many Americans that would realize that.
Well, that's in my circles, that was what we heard. And also I noticed in between the lines from Arab state statements and things of that, well, this was all calculation to prevent this agreement from happening.
Yeah, I can definitely say I am shocked on that one. Not.
It's okay. Y'all all need to, wake up in the morning once in a while.
Yeah. It's, I guess I just, from, I don't want to say like maybe a humanitarian perspective, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's the hard part. That's the hard part. War sucks.
Yeah.
and it sucks for the people where it's taking place. And I think the Palestinians deserve better than the representation they receive from Hamas.
Oh yeah, for sure. I wish there was a way maybe Israel could find a way to get food to the people that need it
Yeah.
without some of the extras that seem to be happening. I guess that's where my heart goes. Is
Well,
hey, we have to
everybody's
figure
heart
out a
goes
way to
to
get
it.
their food.
Everybody's heart goes to it. I mean, and that's and that also gets played. That gets played. I went to before this big war happened. I went to Gaza and with some Palestinians. They showed me a paid for well, and it had been destroyed by the Israelis. Why? Because the Hamas had started firing rockets from the well, and so the
Wow.
Israelis had to destroy the well because of rockets were coming towards it. And then uh, what did Hamas say? Well, the Israelis destroyed our well water so that we can't survive. Those kind of games are going on a daily basis.
Wow, now that is shooting a rocket
And
out
I'll
of a
tell you
well.
another.
That
I'll
is
tell you another. I was there. I was right there when I went to the border, and the gates of Kearney were shut down because Hamas had just had attacked the gates. This is where commerce goes back and forth between Israel and Gaza, and there were $3 million worth of strawberries that were supposed to come across the border and get shipped to Europe. And those strawberries, that's $3 million in the pockets of Palestinian farmers, right? It was supposed to help them out. Well, that never happened because Israel shut down the gates because of a terrorist attack. And then Hamas says, well, Israel just prevented $3 million worth of goods from going to Europe. And so what kind of games are happening here? It's the money game where money comes in out of empathy for those who deserve the money. However, those who control the money don't always share not just the money but the food with the people who really need it. And it's so how do you distribute something fairly in a place that is unfair to begin with?
that is very I mean, you can't really argue that.
Well, it's
You
hard.
know,
It's hard. And so you want to do your best, and so you have countries that feel so bad that they're you know dropping parachutes full of food into Gaza and hoping it gets to where it needs to go. And I understand that frustration, but I put that fully in the laps of Hamas.
yeah, I mean, definitely a couple of things that you've shared has definitely changed my opinion a little bit on the situation to a degree. Is China involved in this at all? Like, do they have like a silent part that maybe people don't know about? Because obviously they're linked with Russia, who's linked with Iran. China needs a lot of
In the
oil.
Middle East, not so much as elsewhere. Of course, they have the whole Taiwan issue that they're focusing on and looking at Ukraine with great interest because it's a similar situation. They see Taiwan as part of China and never have seen it any other way. Russia sees Ukraine as part of Russia, have never seen it any other way. So they're watching to see very carefully how this goes. So they have, and they're also more involved in Africa with the drilling of oil in a variety of places, and they're trying to get oil from anywhere they can get it simply because of their large population that requires so much energy. In fact, they're the major purchaser of Russian oil as well as Iranian oil. So any sanctions on China for buying Russian oil would hurt them just as much. They'd probably try and buy more Iranian oil after that, but they're very focused on energy resources all over the world. Middle East being important there, but they don't buy a lot from the Middle East.
Yeah, I mean that was something I was always just curious about because I know the Chinese have done some deals in Africa, and when it comes time to pay, some of these nations don't exactly have the money to pay.
No, and so then they just take over.
Yeah.
And it's okay. Well, we'll just get our oil for free then, and take over your whatever you're doing. And it's almost built that way into the contracts. It's dealing with the Chinese if you're an underdeveloped country is not a very easy thing.
Oh no, for sure. As we kind of talk a little bit, we'll kind of swing back a little bit more towards
Sure.
NATO and Russia and
Yeah,
China.
that's fine.
Are we entering a new Cold War with the two of them combined, Russia and China? Because it kind of feels like a new Cold War, maybe not completely nuclear based, but it feels like we're
Well,
heading
you
that
could
way.
argue that it's even little more than that. That it involves North Korea, Iran, Venezuela, and some even say South Africa. But I would put at the top of the list Russia and China. They're the two most important, which have always been the two most important. We had this thing called a strategic triangle where we tried to play one off the other for a while. And that was interesting during the Cold War, because when China developed nuclear weapons, they were having border problems with Russia, and Russia did not want them to get nuclear weapons. Came to us and said, "You want to do a joint strike on China to prevent them from having nuclear weapons?" And Richard Nixon turned around and showed that to the Chinese and used it to open the door to China. It says, no, we don't want to strike the Chinese because we see economic opportunities for the United States there. All right. And so that most people don't know that was one of the crucial things that helped open the door to China. But now you could see possibly Russia being concerned about China in another way, and that is, especially if they can't buy their oil, what good are they to them? And so there is something to be said that triangle is coming back into play, because Russia and China, they actually have an alliance. Right before he went into Ukraine, he said that, he met with China, made 12 oil deals, knowing full well that the Germans were going to stop buying oil from them after they invaded Ukraine, and said that they were in an alliance that cannot be broken. Yeah, there is an alliance between Russia and China, and they are using others like Iran and North Korea to bolster their fringes. North Korea is sending troops to Ukraine, and Iran has sent drones that are killing Ukrainians. So there is a realignment of interests, and it's not exactly the Cold War, but what people forget is nuclear weapons are still in the background, because Russia and China have them. North Korea has them. Iran wanted them. We put a temporary stop to that, but I don't think that's over yet. I think there's going to be another Israel-Iran confrontation, and it's going to be sooner rather than later.
That's the part, I guess, that makes me a little nervous.
Well,
it
should make you nervous, because, Iran is 3 times the size of Iraq, 3 times the population, 90 million people. And if we hadn't gone in to take out Fordow and Natanz and a couple other spots there that were certainly in the business of making nuclear weapons, they'd have the ability very soon. And it was a tough decision by Trump to do it, because now we're in it. Now we're going to have to make sure that it doesn't happen. And that means more than likely that we have to support Israel in whatever it does to try and destabilize the regime in Iran, because the regime in Iran is not going to go away on its own, and it's not going to give up on its proxies, and it's not going to give up on its hate of Israel. So what does Israel have to do? They're going to have to eventually deal with Iran. We've sided with them on the nuclear issue, but if back in the 90s and 2000s, we looked at polls within Iran. Young people, mostly young people that live there now. It's like 60% under the age of 25, and they all want better. They all want better relations with the United States. What happens once you attack Iran? That goes down the toilet, because they're very proud, very, very proud people. Sort of like whenever we get attacked, we support the president, no matter if they're Democrat or Republican, because we have to rally around the flag. Well, they have that sort of pride in Iran too. However, with a much different governmental structure that needs a lot of reform.
Yeah, you brought up Germany, and that made me it kind of popped in my head. I remember, and I know you know a lot about NATO.
Yes.
And I remember, I think it was 2018 when Germany was at the table with Trump. And I mean, Trump was definitely a little bit direct, I mean, that's a little bit his style, but he told
Blunt,
German,
if you will.
yeah, he told the chancellor back then, he essentially said, "You're too dependent on Russia." He goes, "They have you essentially squeezed."
Yeah.
And when there's a war, you guys are going to pay the price for it because of your essentially lack of investment and trying to diversify. I guess in so many ways is what he's trying to say.
Well, yeah, that was a tough discussion, and he had, as well as other analysts, has pointed out that it makes no sense that you're going to criticize Russia for invading Ukraine and then pay them to develop their military by buying their oil and gas.
Right. Yeah,
It's
and
kind of
that's
contradictory. And
yeah.
I think that was at the basis of the argument that Trump took to the Germans and said in his own way, which I probably would have said more diplomatically,
Yeah.
and let him come to the conclusion that you and I already know. But the fact of the matter is, that's his style, and some people don't appreciate it, and most Europeans don't because they don't think it's diplomatic enough. They're not used to a businessman being in charge of international relations. He's very transactional. You do this, I do that, and if you don't do this, I don't do that. That's Trump's style. But at the same time, he has to couch it in terms that are more palatable to those who want to hear it. But Americans tend to want to be more direct about it, and I think they were tired of politicians saying that, oh, this is with beautiful words, we're going to do this and do that. And then all of a sudden they look at the stock market's not doing well. They can't buy a house, and the Europeans are only paying 23% of NATO costs.
Yeah, I definitely supported Trump on making NATO pay. Well, not making it, but getting everybody to
Yeah,
contribute
and
more.
they have, and I think Ukraine
Yeah,
has been Biden had something to do with that as well. He rallied the Europeans for Ukraine, but at the same time, they've boosted, Germany in particular has boosted up to 5% of its GDP, which is important because they're the biggest economy in Europe, and they're actually putting troops in the former Baltic states, which used to be Eastern Prussia. So they're comfortable doing that, but that has to make the Russians a little nervous. But at the same time, the Germans are stepping up in terms of noticing what the threats are, and they're not hiding behind the guilt of World War II as much as they used to.
yeah. And I know a controversial party that's over there in your background. You would know.
OAFD, yeah, the
Yeah, they're
Alternative for Deutschland, yeah.
yeah. That's definitely a very controversial party. I would
Well,
say it's more extreme than MAGA here, if you wanted to say that.
it's hard to compare because they're different. But that all stemmed when Angela Merkel was in power, and she decided she would accept immigration from the Middle East, from all the Middle East wars, and she said, "Es gibt keine Alternativen," that it gives no alternative, and that's when that party was formed. The alternatives for Deutschland, for Germany, came from that in contravance of that particular statement, that and they are anti-immigrant and pro-German, and they have gotten a lot of seats in the German Bundestag.
Yeah, I've noticed that Poland has kind of joined those ranks, and a few other European nations have kind of went very isolationist in terms of
I wouldn't
immigration.
go isolationist because they need the they need the collective security in order to fend off Russia, and that's why they wanted to join NATO, and they wanted to join the EU so they could develop their economies, because, as we know, the Soviet command economies don't pan out very well. So they need to play the game of, we need your help in order to defend against Russia coming back and getting us yet again. But at the same time, we want to be proud of our own heritage and our own country. I think that you see happening in a variety of places, and it takes a variety of political forms. Some of them are moderate, some of them are not so moderate. Some of them are, more right wing, and Western democracies are concerned about that because you don't want another Hitler coming to power and then stopping elections and starting World War III with nuclear weapons in everybody's arsenal.
Yeah, that's it's definitely something nobody wants.
No.
kind of playing on that a little bit, what lessons from the Cold War can guide us today, like as a country towards approaching it?
Well, I think one of the things that Ronald Reagan did when I was there was something called, what was it called? Competitive strategies. And competitive strategies was a Harvard Business School concept where it's pretty easy. And the idea is that you play to your strengths and you use your strengths in order to outcompete the other side. And this is what Ronald Reagan did with SDI, with the Strategic Defense Initiative. Because when Gorbachev came in, as you recall, in 1985, Soviet economy was in the toilet, as it mostly was, but getting worse because they overspent on military and didn't spend enough on goods. So Soviet citizens would carry plastic bags with them everywhere they went. They were called just in cases. Just in case there's anything in the store, you better have a bag to put it in, because they don't have bags either. And so that was going on in the mid 1980s. As well as the Soviet life expectancy was going down. I think it was about 54 for men at that point, and going down to age 50. And because they drink a lot and they don't eat right, they didn't have enough food. So Gorbachev knew this. And then, well, by the United States saying, we're going to develop SDI, we spent a lot of money on it. And it didn't matter if it didn't have immediate results. The immediate result for Gorbachev was they couldn't keep up. And he said this actually at a meeting at Princeton, where he says, well, as soon as they came out with SDI, this was just going to totally crush our economy if we were going to be able to keep up. And so this led to the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. So there's something to be said of playing to your advantage, namely your economic advantage. And I think Trump is trying to do that, maybe too harshly in some areas, but use your advantage in order to promote the United States and the United States' ability to remain the only superpower in the free world.
Yeah, and that's going to be very difficult no matter who it is. When you kind of look at a lot of Americans seem to be tiring of the quote unquote world's police role that we play sometimes.
Yeah.
How do we balance that?
Well, that's a great question. You have to balance it, and that means you can't go in either direction too far.
Right.
And that when we were in wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, President Obama said we have to do more nation building at home, no nation building overseas. All right. And then President Trump said, well, no never ending war. So we can't do that overseas. And we have to focus on making America great again. In other words, rebuilding our industries, and so that we can afford to remain a superpower and having energy independence and, the whole if you don't pay attention to your population, you get voted out of office. So
Right.
you have to, and it's the economy, baby. What was it? The economy's stupid. What Clinton's chalkboard said, and when was that? 1990, I think. I walked into the Clinton headquarters, and there was on the board, it said, it's the economy, stupid, underlined. Right. And that was played up, and he got lucky because Ross Perot took 20% of the vote away from George H.W. Bush. And as a result, he got elected president, but he did so on focusing on economic issues.
Yeah. No, I definitely, the economy, that when it comes down to it, the dollar trumps everything in the Americans' eyes. In terms of our domestic issues, that's, if you don't got a job, you don't care about what's going on overseas.
Well, you don't care about anything else. You got to have food on the table and gas in the car. Number one, right? And kids fed. Kids have to be fed. And or if you don't have kids, you got to be fed. So it's almost a pyramid of human needs, the Maslow pyramid of needs, where you start at basic security with food, and then once you have food, then you can talk about social organization. Once you have that, you can talk about nirvana, either the rock group or your life. But if you don't have enough to begin with, you don't have that basic level of human security to be able to think about anything else. And I have a feeling that Americans are a little bit too much that way, that they only think about it when they need to. I've talked with other Europeans who notice that Americans are happy as long as everything's going good, and they don't care about whatever you're doing as long as everything's going good. And then when it goes bad, then they want to, come on, you guys got to come in here and fix it. But we don't pay attention until something goes bad, and that's probably a problem of for our diplomacy more than anything else, especially because it looks like we're cutting back on diplomatic personnel.
Yeah, and kind of touching on that as we head towards the end here, is there a centrist / middle ground strategy that can protect our interests without being in an endless war?
Which one are we talking about? Meaning,
Let's go the Russia-Ukraine part. Is there like a
well,
centrist area we can approach?
well, the centrist area is a difficult one because now you have 1.2 million lives lost on both sides, and so they have more than just skin in the game. They had, well, blood and treasure in the game. And so the compromise that's going to need to take place is going to be difficult for Ukrainians to accept. I think that they want all of their land back. The Russians are not prepared to give it until one side is going to budge on that. That fighting is going to continue, but let's be frank. But for it to stop, both sides are going to have to give something up, and it's going to be harder for Ukraine to do it because they've lost 20% of their territory. However, from our point of view, if Russia continues moving towards the west and takes all of Ukraine, that threatens the eastern flank of NATO, which also creates a possibility of World War III, which we don't want to see happen. On the other hand, you don't want to appease Putin too much either. And some see the Alaska as the Moose Munich, namely that, we gave him what he wanted. We didn't give him anything. We were just sitting there listening to what he wanted, and then so that there could be another meeting. But at the same time, you got to be careful in getting involved in making peace when others have spent so much blood and treasure. Remember World War I? We came in 1917 and saved everybody's butt, but then told them what to do, and they didn't appreciate it. We told them not to put reparations on Germany because that would come back and bite you. Guess what happened? They put reparations on Germany, and it started another war. So others that have spent blood and treasure in a war will appreciate your efforts in trying to mediate, but as long as you don't tell them what to do so much.
Yeah, it's perfect. From your perspective, as can kind of make this the last question here, what are our leaders missing when they're talking to the people? Like, because it doesn't seem like always that our message, no matter if you're a Democrat trying to communicate to Democrats or Republican, what are they missing when they're talking about foreign
Well,
policy?
I think you need to go back into the rationale for their decisions. And if you carefully lay it out to the American people, how we got here and why here are our options, and this is the best option because A, B, and C, I think that's a good formula for any policy, but we don't tend to do that. And our leaders tend to say, well, it's their side is wrong and our side is right. Well, let's explain why our side is right and their side is wrong, rather than just go ahead and do name calling. What I really don't like is the ad hominem attacks against personalities rather than debating the policy. And whenever things go south, well, you're a communist or you're a fascist. Oh, really? Take a look at our system of government. That's not how it works. So it shows a kindergarten understanding of how the world works and how we need to move forward.
No, that's great. Heading into the next decade, where do you see this all going?
Well, I think there needs to be some sort of deterrence of this new alignment of Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. Iran can't have nuclear weapons, and that's going to require more enforcement, likely to be Israel with us backing them. I see, us having to balance the relationship between Russia and China. China is a communist country that wants Taiwan back. I think that is the next big issue that we'll have to confront probably after Trump leaves. I don't think China wants to do anything as long as Trump is there. So, and the next administration is going to be very key in it, to what they signal to the outside world, and whether or not we continue with economic prosperity and peace, or whether we go down the road where we're continuing to spend more and more on defense because the war is not a safe place.
And obviously, I know you can't make any predictions necessarily about the future completely, because obviously, President Trump can't run for a third term.
No.
Do you see J.D. Vance as the future of the MAGA movement and the party, or just kind
No,
of like
could be
he's there?
him, could be Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, National Security Advisor. He's got both roles. He's run for president before, so he knows how that works. And Vance is not, but I think they'll probably put Vance up as the inheritor of MAGA, ex-Marine, at the right-hand side of the president, what have you. But I think for foreign policy, I would, I like foreign policy guys. So I think
Oh yeah,
it would be Rubio would be a better choice because he's a little more savvy in terms of what you say and what you don't say in public versus what you say in private. Having been at the helm at a difficult time for foreign policy, I think that's we'll see where this goes, but I think Vance will be the first in line, but Marco Rubio should be considered as well.
yeah, I definitely think Vance is going to be very telling of where the MAGA movement goes, because I think if Rubio becomes the next nominee, I think you're going to see the GOP come back a little bit more towards the center of where it used to be.
Yeah, and that would also be important for the Hispanic vote.
Yes.
But the big question is, who do the Democrats come up with? Who's leading the Democrats, and where's the vision other than Trump's a dictator? I don't see the vision coming. When I was 7 years old, I met John F. Kennedy in Yosemite National Park on August 12th, 1962. I shook his hand, said, "Hiya, Prez." My mom scolded me for not saying it. "To you, it's Mr. President, Ronnie." But little did I know I would interview his entire cabinet 20 years later in Washington on the Cuban Missile Crisis. And he was tough on the Soviets. He was tough on foreign policy, but liberal at home, and supported civil rights, where I don't see any of that sort of leadership emerging yet out of the Democratic Party. And I think that's what they're going to need. Somebody that's a little more towards the center, a lot less towards the left, and interested in economics as much as they are in social justice.
Yeah, I think, and obviously I don't think he'll be a presidential candidate, but John Fetterman. I think he's a good representation of where they want to go.
Pennsylvania, that's interesting. Well, he has actually come out in support of the president on certain things, and that's an interesting idea. Of course, his health is an issue, but that could emerge as somebody who catches everyone's attention. I don't think you'd have to wear a suit when you went to the White House in his administration.
Definitely the most casual politician I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, you and me both.
I really appreciate you coming on, Ron, and hopefully we can get you back on here some more.
I'd love to, whenever you want, on whatever topic.
Yeah,
I believe in what you're doing, and you're a great host.
I appreciate it, Ron. Thank you so much, and everybody, feel free to tune in. Don't forget to visit our site, themiddlegroundmic.com. We got a newsletter on there that comes out every 2 weeks. It's got phenomenal information and some tidbits in there.
Yeah, watch this guy. He's doing important stuff.
I appreciate it, Ron. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Have a good one.
You too.